Hey, what's up, peeps and ponies? It's Brony here, and this is my second Commander Deck Tech for Chulane, Teller of Tales, which is a 2 green, white, blue legendary creature human druid with vigilance, and whenever I cast a creature spell, draw a card. Then I may put a land card from my hand onto the battlefield. And if I pay 3 and tap him, return target creature I control to its owner's hand. So, with that in mind, he can be a pretty powerful card if you play a bunch of creatures. So there's a win condition that I put in that uses 2 cards that I actually got one and bought the other. Which the 2 are Ancient Silver Dragon, which is a 6 blue creature elder dragon with flying, and whenever Ancient Silver Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20 and draw cards equal to the result, and I have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So that can get pretty nasty if you roll 20 or high or a little lower than that. So if, like, let's say 15 through 20, that would be crazy. And then the other card for the win condition is Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, a 1 blue legendary planeswalker Jace, which says, if I would draw a card while my library has no cards in it, I win the game instead. And if I +1 Jace, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, and I get to draw a card. And if I -8 him, which is his ultimate, I draw 7 cards. Then, if my library has no cards in it, I win the game. And it starts off with 4 loyalty counters on him, which is good in a way, because it gives you a head start. So those are the 2 win con cards. And then we have the card advantage cards, which I will get to in a second. Okay, here we go. So first off, we have Archmage Emeritus, or Archmage Emeritus as it is, which is a 2 blue creature human wizard with Magecraft, and whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. So that lets me draw cards off instants and sorceries. The next card I have is Triskaidekaphile, which is a 1 blue creature human wizard with you have no maximum hand size, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. And if I pay 3 and a blue, I draw a card. So that's based on winning the game with a pretty massive amount of cards in your hand. And then we have Gretchen Titchwillow, which is a green-blue legendary creature halfling druid that if you pay 2 and a green and a blue, you draw a card. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So it works just like Chulane, except you have to pay mana in order to do it instead of having an activated ability. And then we have Isperia Supreme Judge, which is a 2 white blue legendary creature Sphinx with flying, and whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker I control, I may draw a card. So that lets me draw cards whenever an opponent attacks me or a planeswalker. So it's like, so the only planeswalker I have is Jace, to be honest. And then we have Mangara, the Diplomat, which is a 3 white legendary creature human cleric with lifelink, and whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, I draw a card. And whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, I draw a card. So that gives me a lot of card advantage. Then the next card I have is Nadir Kraken, which is a 1 blue creature kraken with, whenever you draw a card, you may pay 1 mana. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on Nadir Kraken and create a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. So that gets pretty big and has card advantage too. Then we have Nezahal, Primal Tide, which is a 5 blue, which is a total of 7 mana. It's a legendary creature, Elder Dinosaur, that says that this spell cannot be countered. So that means anything you try to do to it, you cannot do anything to it. And you have no maximum hand size. And whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, I draw a card. And then, if I discard 3 cards, I exile Nezahal Primal Tide, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So, he comes back, and he's a 7/7, which is whopper. And then the next card we have is Pixie Guide, which is a 1 blue creature fairy with flying and an ability called Grant an Advantage, which means if I would roll 1 or more dice, instead roll that many dice plus 1 and ignore the lowest roll. So that means if, let's say, I were to have the Ancient Silver Dragon out and I were to attack with it, I get to roll 2 d20s instead and ignore the lowest roll I had with the dragon. So that gets to be pretty nasty. Then we have Abundance, which is a 2 green enchantment, which says if I would draw a card, I may instead choose land or non-land and reveal cards from the top of my library until I reveal a card of the chosen kind. Put that card into my hand and put all other cards revealed this way on the bottom of my library in any order. So that's like a wheel effect, which if you don't know what wheel effect means, it's like, well, not wheel effect, it's more of a cycling effect. It's what that means is like I can cycle through my whole entire deck without having to lose any cards. And the last card of the card advantage is Teferi's Ageless Insight, which is a 2 blue legendary enchantment, which says if I would draw a card except the first one I draw in each of my draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. So that means instead of me drawing a card whenever Chulane triggers, I get to draw 2 cards, which is pretty good. And then we're on to the mana rocks, which we have Arcane Signet, which is a 2 generic artifact, which if I tap it, I add 1 mana of any color in my commander's color identity. So I could add either green, white, or blue, which is useful. Then we have Azorius Cluestone, which is a 3 generic artifact that if I tap it, I add white or blue to my mana pool. And then if I pay a white and a blue, tap it, and sacrifice the Cluestone, I draw a card. Then we have Azorius Keyrune, which is a 3 generic artifact with tap it to add white or blue to my mana pool. And if I pay a white and a blue, Azorius Keyrune becomes a 2/2 white and blue bird artifact creature with flying until end of turn. So that's pretty useful. Then we have Azorius Signet, which is a 2 generic artifact that if I pay 1 and tap it, I add white and blue. And then I have Commander's Sphere, which is a 3 generic artifact with tap it to add 1 mana of any color in my commander's color identity, so green, white, or blue. And if I sacrifice the Commander's Sphere, I draw a card. Then the next card is Decanter of Endless Water, which is a 3 generic artifact with you have no maximum hand size, and tap it to add 1 mana of any color. So I can do white, blue, black, red, or green. And then the next one we have is Firemind Vessel, which is a 4 generic artifact with Firemind Vessel enters the battlefield tapped, which means it turns to the side like this. But if I tap it, I add 2 mana of different colors. So I could do it for like 10 different combinations, which I won't name all 10 of them because that would be silly. The next one we have is Mana Geode, which is a 3 generic artifact with, when Mana Geode enters the battlefield, scry 1. And if I tap it, I add 1 mana of any color. Then we have Manalith, which is a 3 casting cost artifact with, tap it to add 1 mana of any color to my mana pool. Then we have Marble Diamond, which is a 2 casting cost artifact that enters the battlefield tapped, and if I tap it, I add white mana to my mana pool. Sorry about the sniffling. It's just that I just got over being sick. And the next one we have is Moss Diamond, which is a 2 casting artifact that enters the tap just like the Marble Diamond, except it's green. Then we have Paradise Plume, which is a 4 casting cost artifact that says, as Paradise Plume enters the battlefield, choose a color. Whenever a player casts a spell of the chosen color, you may gain 1 life. And if you tap it, you add 1 mana of the chosen color. So let's say I were to choose white, for example. Whenever a player casts a white spell, I may gain 1 life, and I get to add 1 white. And then the next card we have is Replicating Ring, which is a 3 casting cost snow artifact that if I tap it, I add 1 mana of any color, and at the beginning of my upkeep, put a night counter on Replicating Ring. Then, if it has 8 or more night counters on it, remove all of them and create 8 colorless snow artifact tokens named Replicated Ring with, tap it to add 1 mana of any color. So that's pretty crazy. Then we have Selesnya Locket, which is a 3 casting cost artifact that says, tap it to add green or white. And then if I pay 4 Selesnya and tap it and sacrifice the locket, I draw 2 cards. And if you don't know what Selesnya is, it's the combination of white and green. Then we have Simic Locket, which is a 3 casting cost artifact that taps to add green or blue. And if I pay 4 Simic, tap it, and sacrifice the Simic Locket, I draw 2 cards, just like the Selesnya Locket, except it's green and blue. Then we have Simic Signet, which is a 2 casting cost artifact that if I pay 1 and tap it, I add green and blue. So it works just like the Azorius Signet, except it's green and blue. Then we have Sky Diamond, which is a 2 casting cost artifact that enters the battlefield tapped, and if I tap it, I add blue. So it works just like the Marble Diamond or the Moss Diamond, except it's blue. And then one of the most staple cards of all Magic the Gathering decks, Sol Ring, a 1 casting cost artifact that taps to add 2 colorless mana. And now we have what I call the big boys. So we have Ajani's Pridemate, which is a 1 white creature cat soldier with, whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on Ajani's Pridemate. And it starts off as a 2/2. So it starts off small, but once you gain a bunch of life, you pretty much have this in the bag. And then the other one is Tishana, Voice of Thunder, a 5 green-blue legendary creature, merfolk shaman, that starts off as a star and says, when Tishana, Voice of Thunder's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand, and I have no maximum hand size, and when Tishana enters the battlefield, draw a card for each creature you control. So that gives me a lot of card advantage. And then we have token, and then we have the token generator cards, which we have Fairy Formation, which is a 4-blue creature fairy with flying, and if I pay 3 in a blue, I create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying, and I get to draw a card. And then the next one we have is Falconer Adept, which is a 3-white creature human soldier, which says whenever Falconer Adept attacks, create a 1/1 white bird creature token with flying that's tapped and attacking. Then we have Marching Duodrone, which is a 2 casting cost artifact creature construct with whenever Marching Duodrone attacks, each player creates a treasure token. So that gives me mana, and it gives all the other players mana as well. Then we have Cathar's Call, which is a 2-white enchantment aura with enchant creature, and enchanted creature has vigilance, and at the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 white human creature token. So that creates me tokens at my end step. And then we have the copier creatures, which are Glasspool Mimic, which is a 2-blue creature shapeshifter rogue, and I may have Glasspool Mimic enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature I control, except it's a shapeshifter rogue in addition to its other types. But what's cool about this is that, as you can see with the symbol up here, it has this little triangle symbol. So that means that this is a Modal double-faced card, or MDFC for short, and it can flip over. So I have these sleeved, and it flips over to become Glasspool Shore, which is a land that enters the battlefield tapped, but it taps to add blue mana. So that is pretty useful for if you're running low on mana. And the other copier we have is Spark Double, which is a 3-blue creature illusion with you may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker you control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it is a creature. It enters the battlefield with an additional loyalty counter on it if it is a planeswalker, and it is not legendary if that permanent is legendary. So if any of my permanents are legendary, this Spark Double does not become legendary, so the legendary status won't trigger it. Then we have a protection, which we have 2. So we have Midnight Pathlighter, which is a 2 white-blue creature human wizard with creatures you control cannot be blocked except by legendary creatures. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, venture into the dungeon. So that includes the dungeon mechanism to the deck. And the other one we have is Fog, which is a green instant with no creatures deal damage in combat this turn. So it just nullifies the damage. Then we have another one, which is pretty crazy. Well, maybe another 2, if I can. Okay, yeah, we do have 2, which allows my creatures to untap if I have it. So first one we have is White Plume Adventurer, which is a 2-white creature orc cleric with when White Plume Adventurer enters the battlefield, you take the initiative. So what the initiative is that it's a new mechanism for Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate, which is one of the more recent sets in Magic the Gathering that includes a dungeon called the Undercity. And then the second part of the description says, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, untap a creature you control. If you've completed a dungeon, untap all creatures you control instead. So if you completed so there are now 4 dungeons in Magic the Gathering, which are the Undercity, the Lost Mine of Phandelver, the Tomb of Annihilation, and the Mad Mage and the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And if you complete one of those, you get to untap all your creatures, which is pretty crazy. And then the next card for untapping creatures is Drumbellower, which is a 2-white creature spirit with flying, and untap all creatures you control during each other player's untap step. So that gets to be pretty nasty. Then we have a few life gain cards, which are Impassioned Orator, which is a 1-white creature human cleric with, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So that's pretty useful for if you're wanting to gain life. And then the other one we have is Cleric class. Let's see, focus. Okay, there we go. So Cleric class is a white enchantment class, which says if you would gain life, you gain that much life plus 1 instead. So if I were to gain 1 life, and if I had Cleric class out, I would gain 2. And so that's for level 1. For level 2, which you have to pay 3 and a white, whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And then for level 3, it says when this class becomes level 3, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. You gain life equal to its toughness. So that gets pretty nasty. And then we have 2 counter abilities, which are Counterspell, which is a blue instant that just says counter target spell. So it could be anything. And then the other one we have is a little more flexible with Sublime Epiphany, which is a 4 blue instant that says choose 1 or more. Counter target spell, counter target activated or triggered ability, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, or target player draws a card. So that's what I meant by more flexibility. It can target a spell, activated ability, or do 3 other things that help me out big time. Then we have 2 of what I call mana dorks. And they are Elvish Mystic, which is a green creature elf druid with tap to add green, and it's only a 1/1. And then we have Llanowar Visionary, which is a 2 green creature elf druid with, when Llanowar Visionary enters the battlefield, draw a card, and if I tap it, I add green mana. And then we have cards to help make my creatures bigger, which are Collective Blessing, which is a 3 green/white enchantment with creatures you control get +3/+3, which can help you out a lot in protecting your creatures from big destruction. And then the other card for big creatures is Mirari's Wake, which is a 3 green/white enchantment that says creatures you control get +1/+1, and whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. So instead of me creating 1 white, I get to make 2 white, which is useful. Then I have some cards that lock up the what people are going to do, like Banishing Light, which is a 2-white enchantment that says when Banishing Light enters a battlefield, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. The same goes with Borrowed Time, which is a 2-white enchantment that says when Borrowed Time enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Borrowed Time leaves the battlefield. Same thing with Cast Out, which is a 3-white enchantment with Flash, and when Cast Out enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Cast Out leaves the battlefield, but I can cycle it for white, which means I discard the card and draw a card. And then we have Prison Realm, which is a 2-white enchantment, which says when Prison Realm enters the battlefield, exile target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls until Prison Realm leaves the battlefield. And when Prison Realm enters the battlefield, scry 1. And scry means that I look at the top card of my library and choose to keep it on top or bottom. And then we have some nasty cards in a way that can make you pretty overpowered, like Luminous Broodmoth, which is a 2-white creature insect with flying, and whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. So that like blinks it, and it also puts a flying counter on it, which makes it pretty overpowered. And then we have Akroma's Memorial, which is a 7 generic legendary artifact, which says creatures you control have flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from black and from red. So that gets to be pretty overpowered if you have it out. And then we have Vidalcan Orrery, which is a 4 casting cost artifact, which says you may play non-land cards anytime you could play an instant. So that means any cards you play have flash. And then we have Emergency Powers, which is a 5-white-blue instant, which says each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards and exile Emergency Powers. And it has Addendum, which means if I cast this spell during my main phase, I may put a permanent card with converted mana cost 7 or less from my hand onto the battlefield, which is useful. And then we have Bond of Discipline, which is a 4-white sorcery, which says tap all creatures your opponents control. Creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. And then we have the land advantage cards, which are AC, Tyrant of Gyre Strait, which is from the what is it called? Land's Wrath? No. I forget. I know it's from a pre-con deck, but I forget which one. But it's a 4 green blue legendary creature Serpent, which says you may play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. So that's useful. And then we have Azusa, Lost But Seeking, which is a 2-green legendary creature human monk, which says you may play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. So if I had both AC and Azusa out, I get to play 3 additional lands, which is bonkers ridiculous. And then we have 5 different cards that have a pacifying effect on creatures, which are Arrest, which is a 2-white enchantment aura that says enchant creature, and enchanted creature cannot attack or block, and its activated abilities cannot be activated. And then we have Faith's Fetters, which is a 3 white enchantment aura with enchant permanent, and when Faith's Fetters enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life, and enchanted permanent cannot attack or block, and its activated abilities cannot be activated unless they're mana abilities. And then we have Luminous Bonds, which is a 2 white enchantment aura with enchant creature, and enchanted creature cannot attack or block. And then we have Nahiri's Binding, which is a 1 white enchantment aura with enchant creature or planeswalker. Enchanted permanent can't attack or block, and its activated abilities cannot be activated. And then we have Pacifism, which is a 1 white enchantment creature, or not enchantment creature, enchant creature, which is an enchantment aura, that enchanted creature cannot attack or block. And now we're getting on to the fun part, the mana base. So first off, we have Reliquary Tower, which is a land that says I have no maximum hand size, and if I tap it, I add colorless. And then we have Rejuvenating Springs, which is a land that says Rejuvenating Springs enters the battlefield tapped unless I have 2 or more opponents. And if I tap it, I add green or blue. And then the next one we have is Port Town, which is a land, and it says, as Port Town enters the battlefield, you may reveal a plains or island card from your hand. If you do not, Port Town enters the battlefield tapped. And if I tap it, I add white or blue. And then we have Otawara Soaring City, which says tap to add blue. And if I channel it for 3 blue and discard Otawara, I return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. This ability costs 1 less to cast for each legendary creature I control. And then we have Hallowed Fountain, which is a land that's a plains and an island. And if I tap it, I add white or blue. And as Hallowed Fountain enters the battlefield, I may pay 2 life. If I do not, it enters the battlefield tapped. Then we have Fabled Passage, which is a land that taps to and sacrifice Fabled Passage. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Then, if I control 4 or more lands, untap that land. And then we have Eiganjo, Seat of the Empire, which is a legendary land that taps to add white mana, and if I channel it for 2 and a white and discard Eiganjo, it deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature I control. Then we have Branchloft Pathway, which is a land that taps to add for green, and it's also a double face. So it flips over to become Boulderloft Pathway, which taps to add white. And sorry if I'm shaking the camera a little bit, it's because it needs to focus. And then we have, for the last of the non-basic lands, Bark Channel Pathway, which is a land that taps to add for green. And on the other side, we have Tide Channel Pathway, which is a land that taps to add for blue. And now we have the the regular basic lands, which we have a total of 8 plains. I have one that looks like an Ukiyo-e land and the rest are just regular because I don't have that many Ukiyo-e lands. And then we have a total of 8 islands. And this one also has the 1 Ukiyo-e land. And then we also have a total of 8 forests. And then we're gonna get on to the tokens, which you'll need a 1/1 white bird creature token, a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token, a copy token, a 1/1 blue fairy creature token, a 1/1 white human creature token, a replicated green snow artifact token, a treasure token, the initiative, which it says whenever one or more creatures a player controls deals combat damage to you, that player takes the initiative. And whenever you take the initiative and at the beginning of your upkeep, venture into Undercity, which I will show you right now. This is the Undercity. So the first part of it says Secret Entrance, which says search your library for a basic land card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle. And you can choose one or the other, which you can choose the Forge, which says to put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature, or the Lost Well, which lets you scry 2. If you choose the Forge, you can choose either the Trap, which target player loses 5 life, or the Arena, which goads target creature. If you chose the Lost Well, you could choose the Arena as well, or you can choose Stash, which lets you create a treasure token. If you chose the Trap or the Arena, you go down to Archives, which lets you draw a card. And if you chose the Stash or the Arena as well, you go down to Catacombs, which lets you create a 4/1 black skeleton creature token with Menace. And if you choose either the Archives or the Catacombs, you go down to what's called the Throne of the Dead 3, which says reveal the top 10 cards of your library. Put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. It gains hexproof until your next turn, then shuffle your deck. So there are a few tokens that are missing here, but it's whatever. So thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to super smash that like button, hit that subscribe button too, and I will see you all in another Deck Tech. Peace!